My only motivation was for the best for the post office and for the hundreds of postmasters that I met. And I regret deeply that I let these people down.
Ms. Vennells, that's absolute rubbish, isn't it? Who do you blame? Who did you trust too much? Name them.
I loved the post office.
You failed to ask the right questions. You couldn't be bothered, could you, Ms. Vennells?
There were so many forks in the road, but you always took the wrong path, didn't you?
It was an extraordinarily complex undertaking, and the post office and I didn't always take the right path. I'm very clear about that.
You exercised power with no thought of the consequences of your actions, despite those consequences staring you in the face.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. Could you say?
You exercised power with no thought of the consequences of your actions, despite those consequences staring you in the face.
The scheme was set up, and for the time that I worked on that, I believed that I wasn't working alone in this. I was surrounded by colleagues, as the inquiry has seen, and I believed that we were doing the right things, and clearly that was not always the case.
I take you to...
If I may, we did look at the consequences, and although that may have been misunderstood, the reason I circulated the 8 cases, including Mr. Castleton's, was that it was an act of compassion, and I was very moved by the content of that. That was right at the start of the mediation process, and I felt it was important that I and colleagues understood that. But I accept your point that there are no words I can find today that will make the sorrow and what people have gone through any better.
Ms. Vennells, that's humbug. You preach compassion, but you don't practice it. For example, with Mr. Castleton, he was even closed out of the mediation process. And you know why that was, don't you?
I'm sorry, I cannot recall the detail of that. I wasn't personally involved in which cases did or didn't go into the mediation scheme.
It so deeply moved you, you said in your statement, it was so shocking, yet he was locked out of the mediation scheme because, of course, he was an illustrious scalp that could be used, a precedent that could be used in the GLO.
What happened to Mr. Castleton is completely unacceptable. At the time his case was not taken through the scheme, I personally wasn't involved in the decision, but the post office took the decision based on legal advice.
Yes.
It was wrong, Mr. Henry. I completely agree with that. And what happened to Mr. Castleton is unforgivable.
And you instigated no investigation into why £321,000 of public money was used to crush him and grind him into the dirt.
I agree with what you're saying.
Thank you. I'm talking now about things that were staring you in the face. No need to get it up on screen, but you remember, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with talking to your husband. I don't suggest that you should be ashamed at all about that. But you wrote that email, my engineer, computer literate husband sent the following reply to the question, what is a non-emotive word for computer bugs, glitches, defects that happen as a matter of course? Answer, exception or anomaly. You can also say conditional exception anomaly, which only manifests itself under unforeseen circumstances. Unforeseen, random, difficult to predict, impossible to guard against. It was staring you in the face, but you took from your husband's text or email that which suited you and ignored or dismissed the potent jeopardy that these bugs could arise under unforeseen circumstances. Isn't that shocking?
I covered this yesterday with Mr. Beer. I should have said bugs. The post office should have said
I'm not
bugs.
talking about that. I'm talking about manifests itself under unforeseen circumstances. In other words, these things could crop up intermittently at any time, as Tim McCormack warned you in 2014. And here you have this from your husband on the 2nd of July 2013, warning you about bugs that manifest themselves under unforeseen circumstances. You should have been horrified.
I was concerned by the bugs. There was...
You did nothing.
Well, Mr. Henry, let her finish, please.
So be it, sir.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
You were concerned by the bugs, you say. What I'm suggesting to you is that you took what you wanted from the information your husband had supplied to you, but you did not heed the warning contained in what he said, which was that these bugs could manifest themselves under unforeseen circumstances. It was staring you in the face.
I am very sorry that I was not able to find out what the inquiry has found out. I don't know today how much wasn't told to me. I do know information that I didn't get, and I don't know in some cases why it didn't reach me. But my only motivation was for the best for the post office and for the hundreds of postmasters that I met. And I regret deeply that I let these people down.
Ms. Vennells, that's absolute rubbish, isn't it? Under your leadership, with your sidekick, Mrs. van der Boogaard, you took on the Glow litigants in the High Court, fighting tooth and nail, allowing counsel on behalf of the Post Office to cross-examine the litigants on the basis that the losses were their fault due to their incompetence or dishonesty. That's what happened under your leadership. Ms. Vennells, that's what you allowed to happen under your leadership. This wasn't thinking, hang on, there might just be a problem with the system. I'd better be careful. This was tooth and nail, fight for the Post Office, wasn't it, Ms. Vennells?
And Mr. Steen, my ambition was that every case in that scheme was looked at, and the inquiry has heard, and I was disappointed when Angela van der Boogaard gave her evidence that she didn't talk more about that, because one of the consistent piece of feedback we had on the investigations in these cases is, and the inquiry heard it from Patrick Bork as well, is that they were looked at in every detail, they were re-examined, the system was apparently considered. I don't know why it was the case that the issues that were there were not found in those cases, but that was the ambition at the time. I believed that I was asking the right questions. I wasn't an IT expert. I may not have asked the right questions, but I never once held back from asking if I was unsure about something. Perhaps if I didn't have the technical expertise, I wasn't asking the correct questions. But and I've said this a number of times, I trusted individuals with whom I worked. I trusted that the audits that we've talked about seemed to confirm that the system was working as it should, that there were risks around privileged access, that I accept. But at no point did I have any information that would have pointed me to something I knew nothing about.
Ms. Vennells, you're not stupid. You studied French, Russian, business as a degree. You then worked for well-known companies in the UK, Whitbread, Argos, others. You rose through the ranks at the Post Office to become its CEO. You were pushing forward under network transformation. You've been quoted as saying that you want and you see a future of the Post Office opening up more branches, 30,000 branches in the future. That was you, Ms. Vennells, at the time. A vision you were expressing to everyone that asked about what you could see for the future. Yet here, all of these facts were adding up to there being a real problem, a really difficult problem to chew over, right the way through 2013. You failed, didn't you? You failed to get into this on your account. You failed to ask the right questions. You couldn't be bothered, could you, Ms. Vennells? The risk was too great. Looking under that rock, you're going to find a problem. It's going to devastate the post office, ruin it. You couldn't let that happen, could you, Miss Vennells?
I loved the post office. I gave it... I worked as hard as I possibly could to deliver the best post office for the UK. It would have been wonderful to have 30,000 post office branches. That would have been the best outcome ever, to have had more post offices in more communities. What I failed to do, and I have made this clear previously, is I did not recognise and it's been discussed across the inquiry, the imbalance of power between the institution and the individual, and I let these people down. I am very aware of that.
You say in your statement you'd never been told about bugs, errors or defects in the system, and you say in your evidence that what you've been told about the Horizon system's robustness was wrong. That's what you're saying. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Now, help us understand, from your work within the post office, why was it that the knowledge of the mismatch bug and the way it was dealt with was known to key post office figures, yet that information had not been supplied to either Ms. van der Bogart or yourself until 2013? How did it happen, Ms. Vennells?
I understand that the situation, that there was managers involved in a meeting looking at the bug. They took a decision on the best approach to it, and it stayed within...
No, Ms. Vennells. That's not the question, is it? How come you weren't told about this until 2013, instead of being told, no problem with the system, Ms. Vennells, it's robust, no bugs in the system? How come you hadn't been told until 2013 that that actually was a lie? It's not true, there were bugs in the system. You did ask that question, didn't you? Are you saying that you didn't ask that question? Ms. Vennells?
So you're on mute.
I simply intervened to say that you asked her a question, but then asked her a second question before she'd answered the first question.
All right, I'll recap. Ms. Vennells, 2013, you're told that there's bugs in the system. Previous to that, you've been told no bugs in the system.
Yes.
Simple as that.
Yes.
Help us understand. You did ask the question, didn't you, Ms. Vennells? Why haven't I been told this before?
I asked the question, so I cannot remember today what question I asked, but I'm sure you're right that I would have asked that question, and I imagine the answer that came back was this is a bug that happened in 2010, it was fixed. At the time the bug happened, I don't know where my responsibilities lay. One imagines that the issues around the IT were raised to the IT director. What I did when I was told about the bug was to accept, too readily probably, that it had been fixed and the right thing had been done.
I'm going to take you to your statement. These are 2 paragraphs. I've asked, if possible, that you've said repeatedly that you've been too trusting, that you accepted what people told you. One of the things that you say that you were told was that there were no bugs in the system. So let's turn to the other side of this. Who do you blame? Who did you trust too much? Name them, please.
I've mentioned the names previously.
No, do it again. Tell us who you think that you shouldn't have trusted because they let you down. Give us the names, please.
I will do that, but I'd also like to say that at the time, I trusted the people who gave me the information. So on the IT side, Leslie Sewell and Mike Young, and there were two other IT directors, but the Times were talking about it was Mike Young and Leslie Sewell. And on the legal side, the general counsels, Susan Crichton and Chris Ojar, and later Jane McLeod. And those people I had worked with on numbers of other very seriously important projects. They had never let me down, and I'm not sure at what stage you start to not trust individuals with whom you have previously. And I think one of the big mistakes, which I mentioned on day one here, is that we did not have sufficient oversight, particularly around two very technical functions, because there is a risk if you rely on, as I did, and my board colleagues did, and my group executive colleagues, so this isn't just me, we relied on one or two key individuals, and that puts a burden on those individuals, and an organisation shouldn't do that. We should have had better scrutiny around the board table in terms of IT and legal, and I thought that I had, particularly on legal, I thought I had the scrutiny from the external legal advisors we were using, and what I've heard through recent evidence to the inquiry may suggest that that wasn't perhaps as good as it should have been.
Let's stay with bugs, errors and defects. You mentioned Mike Young.
Yes.
Right. Mike Young was referred to in your statement as someone that had told you that there's no difficulty with the system, there are no bugs in the system. By mid-2013, you knew that not to be true. He was someone that hadn't told you the truth. Do you agree?
I don't know. In terms of the question put in that very black and white way, yes. I don't know what Mike Young did or didn't know. I can only go on what he told me at the time.